Hi there, it's Jody Lawyer, Holistic Occupational Therapist at Helix Healing Path. And today I thought I would give you a little education on the tactile system and why it is so important for self-regulation and learning how to interpret sensory input that's coming into the body. So for those of you that may experience hypersensitivity to touch, which might be don't like things that are sticky on your fingers, like if you were to make a cake, let's say, and there is the batter that's all over your hand, you immediately want to wash it off. So that's one type of way that you might experience it. You may not like your hairbrush, for example. You may not like tight clothing. You may not like sand on your feet, or the other opposite is like mud, where it's really gooey and your feet are squishy, or like when you go in the lake and your feet are squishing into the mud at the bottom. So those, and you just makes you feel like you're on edge. Then you probably have some sensitivities with your tactile system. So what happens is you're organizing all of this stuff in your brain for use, which are sights and sounds and visual stimuli and tactile and taste and movement and proprioceptive input, and your body is not able to appropriately output that for your use. And so this is when you can feel either heightened anxiety, or you feel like you just want to go inward, or you're feeling very stressed. And it's sometimes it really truly is the way that you're processing tactile input or other types of sensory input. So I'm going to help you today, just give you some pointers on things that you can do in your body. And I want to point out that people can be hypersensitive in one area of sensory processing, and then hypo, meaning kind of dulled sensitivity, in another area. So touch is a really important avenue for communicating with humans and all animals. And so we seek affection by establishing a connection or communicating a need when we are trying to touch. Sometimes it's just putting a hand on somebody's shoulder or an elbow, for example. But truly the hugging is the big piece of really releasing the oxytocin into the brain, which helps your body feel more calm and more organized. And think about it, touch is used to establish comfort, right? When somebody is sad, we want to reassure them by putting our hand on them, maybe holding their hand, or saying, it's communicating, I care about you, I care about how you're feeling right now, even if you're not engaging in a full-on hug. So touch is extremely important. And touch is significant. It's actually starting to develop in utero before a baby is even born. And so touch is the catalyst then for the development of cognitive, social, emotional, physical spheres in an infant. And so that then leads to the development as you grow into toddler and then into adolescence, etc. And so you develop your own sensory threshold for these sensory impulses that are coming on, starting when you are a baby. Massive amounts of information then comes into the individual, and they have a hard time like discriminating and disseminating and how that's going to work for them. And this is all in the autonomic nervous system. So it may manifest also then as problems with balance, and we're going to talk about proprioceptive input in a different lesson, because I just really want to focus on tactile. But those two kind of work hand in hand to help you offset your system so that you're feeling more calm and organized. And so a person may have what's called a lower dermal sensitivity and have a lower threshold to pain. So for example, you go up to the hot stove and you don't pull your hand back in time, and so that person has a really low threshold for pain and maybe can tolerate pain, where another person, just the slightest little nick on your knee or a cut sends you into a tizzy or a spiral. So everyone has a different threshold for the way that they are interpreting the information that's coming in, or these impulses. So on the flip side, somebody that's hyposensitive will seek out stimuli then to help them feel that effect. And so they might like the really tight clothing, for example, like we would recommend like wearing like the Under Armour or some of those kinds of really tight clothing so that they can feel that in their body, and that would be a way to kind of offset that. So then skin really is directly connected with that proprioceptive system because the skin's receptors register the pressure and the intensity of an impulse. And so the movement of the body also causes these dermal impressions, and that's taken in by the little hairs on the skin surface, and that's connected all together into this proprioceptive system. So doing deep pressure types of things will really help to offset your nervous system when you are feeling all this tactile information coming in. Important to understand the tactile system because we're always discriminating. We've got smooth surfaces versus bumpy. We've got light versus heavy. We have soft versus hard, hot versus cold, etc. And so kind of at the base of the hierarchy are these dry textures like sand, dry beans, grass, tree, bark, dry rocks, fabrics. And then as you are able to interpret those kinds of that stimulation or those kinds of inputs, and you can matriculate up to something a little bit more medium, like squishy textures, like when you cook noodles, like spaghetti noodles, let's say, and they're kind of loose and gooey. Things like theraputty, or as I mentioned, a little bit of the maybe squishy mud, maybe it's not quite wet, but it's not quite dry. And then thereafter you move on to really messy, like water, mud, finger paint, yogurt and pudding, or like I said, baking if you get it on your hands. And so when you're baking a cake and it's like running down your hands, let's say, that would be more of a messy texture. So as a child, you learned early on how a particular sensory input felt. And so the more that you can tolerate a variety of these textures and touch sensory inputs, the more adaptive you become at your own self-regulation. And the nervous system is extremely important for how it's discriminating within your own body. So something might be too alerting, but then it might be too dampening in another area. And so it's really imperative that your tactile system is at a place where you are feeling calm and organized, because when you are feeling calm in your body, then you can move up into those higher processes. When we're looking at, like a pyramid of learning, for example, the central nervous system is at the bottom, and then the next rung up is tactile, vestibular, and proprioceptive input. And then we move up into olfactory and visual, auditory, and taste. Then we move up into the next level, which is awareness of two sides of the body, which is your bilateral coordination and connecting those two sides into the brain. And then we move up into body schema and reflex maturation and the ability to screen out this input that you don't need, what's not important. So that person that can't screen out a clock ticking on the wall, or they might hear the person sitting next to them in the movie theater with the popcorn. That is auditory, but it's also this inability to screen out this information. You don't need that, but it's really bothering you, and that's when your reticular activating system is really firing all the time. So as you can see, the more that you are adaptive at self-regulation, and tactile system is important for this, then you're able to really learn and listen and process and be able to store that in your brain to retrieve it later on. So some things that you can do if you feel like you have some tactile issues. I'm always recommending hugging is a go-to for anything. Like the longer that you can hug or engage in a hug with someone where they're wrapping their arms around you, that is really going to help you with the oxytocin to flow. But some other things that you can do is, if you tolerate like tight clothing, you could wear something underneath a shirt that will give you some of that input. Dipping, if you like being on the sand and at the beach, engage in that. If you are averse to those kinds of things, then you're going to want to gradually do that by exposure, in terms of allowing yourself to limit yourself until you have built up enough time. So you might want to start with 30 seconds, let's say, that you tolerate, like standing on beach sand, and then again you measure it for longer periods of time. And so the more that you can tolerate, as I mentioned, all these different kinds of textures, the more adaptive you will have in terms of self-regulation. So that's another thing. Some other things are lotion, rubbing lotion on your body, or having somebody else do it with these really gentle, deep pressure while they're rubbing it up and down your arm or your leg or on your back. And if you have the opportunity, you can go get massages. The deep pressure is what is so organizing for the nervous system. Light pressure, like when people come and tickle you, that's actually really alerting for your nervous system. And so you really want to be able to tolerate this deep pressure. So massage is a great way to really get in your body, and it's very organizing for your nervous system. Some things you can do at your desk are like a neck roll, like those little, I think they're like beanbag kinds of wraps that you can put around your neck. Even if you are trucking around with like a weighted backpack or something like that, that will give you some input as well. Therapy balls are great too, especially if they have texture to them, because they will provide you with some input too. All right, and this right here is my tilt board or my balance board. I use this, here's the back side, it's a rocker board. I use this a lot with clients because, especially if there's some tactile issues, mine actually has sea salt in the grain, so that when you're standing on it, your feet get a little bit of an extra edge there with the tactile input. You know, the other thing too is fabrics can be very alerting or very organizing. So learning how to discriminate what kinds of fabrics feel good. Like wool can be really itchy, silk is really soft, flannel's really soft. Some people don't like jeans because it feels too tight or too constricting. Some people really like loose clothing with elastic bands or really flowy kinds of clothing. So it's really, some of it really is a, you know, fashion preference, but sometimes it really has to do with how it feels on the body. So, you know, even just touching different fabrics and really being kind of a super sleuth and figuring out how that feels for your body, and does it feel organizing, or does it feel like it's alerting you? So the more that you can tolerate these different types of textures, the more that you will be able to self-regulate in your body. And then again, this helps you with learning, and this helps you with memory formation and being able to retrieve those memories, and also being present. Because think about this, when we are stressed because of the way our body feels, it's hard to engage with people and be present and have eye contact. So again, tactile processing is very important for our ability to self-regulate. So that is it for our little mini lesson today on tactile processing. And if you have any further questions, please reach out to me at jody@helixhealingpath.com. Thanks so much for watching, and have a great day.